start. Hello, everyone. This is Will Harold with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, with our Secret of Light study group, who usually follows Walter Russell, but now we veered into the occult for this couple of times to give a break and maybe set a foundation, which Walter Russell had. And I think what some of us may not realize that when we read Russell, who was, around in the 1900s, and he really formed his foundation in the early 1900s. He would have been very familiar with everything we're discussing today, and it probably would have been a very big part of his life in terms of what was being talked about in the areas he was in his social circles and so on, that theosophy and spiritism and lots of other aspects were very, very much a part of the common knowledge. That was really what people were into. I know, like I said, my grandmother, who was born about this time, I mean, I used to talk to her about cocaine in her sodas when the Coca-Cola was real. She would often talk about the things that were the norms, were the norms in society, and openness to different spiritual concepts was very real. And that's kind of got lost over the period of our current era now. It kind of went that this became big, and we've had certain aspects happen that then brought us back into a more fundamentalist and conservative view of a lot of religion and spirituality. So we're covering these subjects because this may have been what Walter Russell had as his foundation also. So the first thing, can everybody see my screen? Should say spiritual sovereignty, the occult perspective. You can't see my screen. Okay, let's go back to the share again here. Okay, share, there we go. It always helps when I push share. Can you see it now? Can you see spiritual sovereignty, the occult perspective?
Yep.
Everybody? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So if we look down here in the lower right-hand corner, that is our friend Rudolf Steiner when he was younger. A very handsome fellow with his goatee and his glasses. And what I want to share is just a quote from him, because we are going to talk about the Secret Doctrine and a special class in Secret Doctrine of Madame Blavatsky by Manly P. Hall. And we're going to share some of the excerpts out of that. But I'd like to share a little bit about what Steiner said. And this really comes from his book on the philosophy of freedom. And what's interesting about the book Philosophy of Freedom, this is really written before he got involved with theosophy. As I was saying earlier, Steiner was the head of the German branch of the Theosophical Society. And Blavatsky asked him to do that. So he was very, very into the Theosophical Society and what Madame Blavatsky was talking about. He later broke away from them. He believed, from what I read and understand, I wasn't there, so take it as you will. He thought that they were concentrating too much on the Eastern perspective and not enough on Christianity also. So he kind of broke off, and then he started his own study, which was the anthroposophy, or spiritual science. So this quote is that the only knowing that satisfies us is one that does not submit to outer norms, but rather springs from the inner life of the personality. Now, as I say, this quote is in contrast to the occult in the sense that he says that when he wrote this book, he had no reflection with intuition or clairvoyance. He wrote this really on his own, but it does totally apply to what we are going to be discussing today. That once we submit ourselves to outer norms, we lose ourselves and we lose our sense of who we are and what is sovereign. Because once we lose our inner knowing and who we believe God to be and who we believe ourselves to be, because each of us are unique individuals, and when we try to change our uniqueness to conform to norms, we will also lose ourselves and our knowing and what our law is and what our law is based in. So as we go through this study, it's going to be very focused on what Blavatsky was talking about, from what Manly P. Hall had kind of culminated into some very succinct answers from a very difficult book, which is The Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. So as we talk about this, these are some questions that were kind of left over from last week that we didn't get to, but I wanted to continue with them because they are the first two have to do with the idea of what is our personality, what is innate to us individually that makes us unique and that we believe is us and that what we believe is our law within us. Because within each person, human, they have certain beliefs, and they can actually take the beliefs of the collective, or they can actually have, almost like innate beliefs, which would be called like universal laws or cosmic laws. And this is what Russell talked about with the cosmic consciousness, is that as we reach into the inner self and begin to relate to whatever we each believe as source or divine, we then begin to build ourselves into the unique individuals that we are, rather than just becoming a reflection of the collective. And it really, and a lot of this is being reflected today with our choices. Do you choose to be part of the collective because that gives you acceptance, even though it may not be what you agree with? Or do you choose to walk your own path and not be part of the collective, but walk that which you believe to be yours and be the right and be what you're being told is what should be done within yourself as you garner information from the exterior, but the decision is yours and yours alone. And so this may be an initiatory rite, like we talked about with the Marvel video on the Avengers with Loki, to where we have got to take the information that's coming to us today and make a choice. And at that point, this may get us off the karmic wheel to where we either ascend or come back for another lesson. And those are the things we're going to talk a little bit about today within this study that we're going to do. Now, the first question I pose is, what is the difference between philosophy and religious? And the reason I kind of asked this question is, one, when I went to the Rosicrucian Library here in Santa Clara, they have a really great library, very extensive. And she said, well, here's a religion section and here's a philosophy section. I said, what's the difference? She kind of looked at me and smiled. But she didn't ever told me the answer, And the other thing is that today, some people are being asked if they have religious exemptions for what's going on. So it may be important to know what religious is, at least by definition. And again, I'm not using law dictionaries, and the reason I'm not using law dictionaries is because I'm kind of more of a generalist in this, and maybe the law dictionaries are different. But for right now, I'm just using the Merriam-Webster's definition of these things. And so we can begin to explore, what is it between philosophy and religion, right? What's the main difference? If there's two different sections in the library with Dewey Decimal Systems, so there must be some difference. So what is that? So we're going to explore that a bit, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Carl Jung's concept of a personal myth. And then after we talk about those, which kind of give us an idea of maybe who we are, who we want to be, then we're going to dive into the occultism. So let's go ahead and start with, what's the difference between philosophy and religious? So with this, like I said, I just pulled up some definitions for philosophy. And for philosophy, Phil is actually love of Sophie, which is actually love of wisdom if you look at the roots. But the definition in the dictionary is the study of ideas about knowledge, truth, the nature and meaning of life, or a particular set of ideas about knowledge, truth, the nature, meaning of life, a set of ideas about how to do something or how to live. So you could say, if you could say, I have a philosophy of life. It tells me how I am to live. It's about the nature and meaning of life. And it gets back to that question with cosmology and cosmogony, right? Cosmogony really had no reason. It didn't say why the earth was here. It just said it started. Cosmology says why. What's our purpose? So with this, it has the nature and meaning of life. So within philosophy, you may have a meaning of life. So we look at religious, relating to or manifesting faithful devotion to an acknowledged ultimate reality or deity. So number one talks about a deity, right? Where philosophy does not have a deity, it just has a meaning of life. But within philosophy, you could have a religious philosophy, right? Your philosophy could encompass a religion or religious. Number two is of relating to or devoted to religious beliefs or observances. So that could mean that you have certain rituals, certain things you do within your philosophy or within your religiosity, right? And then number three is scrupulous and conscientiously faithful, fervent or zealous. So a zealot in the Bible usually refers to someone who is over the top on their faithfulness. Within the Bible, they talk about Simon the Zealot, who was one of Christ's disciples, and it was also almost a sect of faith within the religious order of Judaism during the time of the Romans. And if anybody remembers the story of Jesus on trial at that time, Jesus was put on trial to be crucified, and it fell on the same day in which you could pardon one person from prison. And the story goes that the Jews stood up and they chose Barabbas. And Barabbas was a zealot, so far as I can understand. I mean, there may be some contentiousness on that, but he was very much a radical, very much a militant type of individual. And they chose Barabbas over Jesus. So that's kind of how zealous works also. So the last one, I don't know if you can see that or not, but this is a member of a religious order under monastic vows. And I could not find anything on what monastic vows meant, just as or being a monk. So within this, there's only really under one where it talks about a deity, but it says ultimate reality, which could go back to philosophy. So where most people would think that religious refers to some type of deity, it may or may not. So, I mean, within the definitions that are within the dictionary. So for us as individuals, do we have a philosophy or do we have a religious view? Because if we're going to take a religious exemption, we have to know what our religious definition is. Do you have to have a God? Do you have to belong to it? There's nothing in here about a church, that you have to be a member of a church or a member of a body or a member of anything else. But you have to have faithful devotion. That's really the key. Within your life, do you have a faithful devotion to an ideal or concept? On the nature, on the knowledge of truth, on the meaning of life. So this is the only thing that I can see which really talks about religious. So if you want to take a religious exemption, I don't know if you have to just say it, tell somebody, I have a certain idea of devotion to acknowledge ultimate reality. That's my religion. That's my religious exemption. Because there's nothing in here that says that it has anything to do with really being a member of an order.
Yeah, no, I just did a workshop on that yesterday, and one of the so I'm pulling up my notes here to look on it, but this, yeah, the 64 Civil Rights Act, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they want to, let's see, what constitutes religious beliefs? No organized, my notes are a little bit messy, but let's see. The employer should assume that religious beliefs are sincerely valid.
Devotion to,
yeah, there's a sincerity that's very important behind it. And then I'm trying to find it, but exactly what you were saying, like there's no specificity. It's more about having some sort of a belief in a supreme being, a God, Allah, Buddha. Like there's a lot of accepted supreme beings. Now this is according to law, right? So you know you're working off a different definition base.
Well, again, one of my specialties is civil rights law, ADA, and civil rights. That's one thing that's what I'm hired by the state to do. For my contract. So I understand and that's why I said, so I don't know if the law dictionaries are always spot on or if it's an interpretation of what is the norm and standard of, like what they call the standard of care in the hospital, right? But the standard norms in which the laws are based from. So probably when you get into the words, the exact wording, if you're standing up in court, you probably want to use the law dictionary. But for your own personal ideas, right? What are you sincere, and have you explored what it is you're sincere about? And define those things so that when questioned, you do have a unique sincerity for that belief. And that's where I'm kind of going with all this, do you have spiritual sovereignty within yourself, within your sincerity of belief that you are a spiritual being and you believe that? Now, do you have to be a zealot? Not truly. That's not the main definition, but you do have to have acknowledge, faithful devotion to what you're talking about, what it says here. Any more comments or input on that, on the definitions before we move on? And again, these are just general. They're just kind of giving an idea that there's no hard and fast definition for religion.
I heard from some of the parents today. Well, in some of the Croatian in the Croato, and they live in the U.S. and in different state probably than yours, Jeremy. But basically, the kids came back from school, or they were told that religious exemption are not going to be accepted. That's not enough. Has to be medical now. So, so religious is out.
Well,
in certain states, whatever.
Well, again, that it can't be out. It's part of the ADA, which is federal
Yeah,
law.
all I'm saying is
now, whether or not they say they accept it, or whether or not they say they're going to accept it.
Yeah, and
exactly. That's a different question. But legally,
yeah,
you can't deny religious exemptions per the ADA.
It was more to do with and you know where that can go, but at this point it was to do with they're not allowed to be in school unless they wear a mask, and the religious exemption is not going to be accepted for that. Has to be a medical exemption. That's what the parents were told. And now the parents are looking for a doctor. That's what I got this morning from quite a few.
But again, like I said, if I was the parent in one of those areas,
sure
I would go forth with the religious exemption and have them say you can't come in.
Yeah,
I've a little perspective on this. On this like strategy. So about 15 years ago, maybe, I had really my only run-in with the court system It was at the, I've been a good boy most of my life. It was in New York at the Republican National Convention, and I got caught up in a lot of the arrests that happened there. And you know, maybe I'll tell the story another time. It's kind of interesting, but what was interesting was going through the court system and how much they just really feeling that firsthand, how much they intimidate and they throw everything at you, whether or not it's legal or not. Like the arrest itself was not legal. They kind of they pushed back with every motion, with every you know, just dragged it out and out and out and out. And fortunately, you know, there were a lot of really great people that came out to do pro bono work, and a lot of people who went through this, like me, had free representation through the court system. And I fortunately was not working at the time, and I didn't have a family to feed, so I had the luxury of time to actually show up in court and do it all. And in the end, when we got to like the final day, they just dropped it and they said, we have no evidence. So it just reminds me of that. Like they can do whatever they want. They can say that religious exemptions won't be accepted, or medical or whatever. But you know, if you just stick with it, you might find something different at the other end.
Yes.
Sure.
And medical exemptions, I don't know if they're actually covered under the ADA or not, because I only deal with disability.
They appear to be faltering too. Not like
Yeah.
It sounds like the religious might actually have a stronger leg.
But, and I wish that the person that I'm going to talk about here, I'm not going to use her name, but her story was here to actually share it with us, is that she went forward with a status correction on her name. And when she went and filed all the paperwork, the court contacted her and said, hey, it's all taken care of. You know, you don't have to come in. She said, no, I want to come in. I want it in the record. All right, I want it in the record that the status correction is done. They said, no, you don't have to come in, you know. She said, no, I want to come in. Set me a date. So they said, okay, we'll set you a date. You don't need it, and I don't know why you're doing it, but you can come in. So she came in and went before the judge, and the judge looks at her and said, what are you doing here? She said, well, I want this in the record that the status correction's done, that my name has been changed from all uppercase to upper and lowercase, and that's what's in the court record. Yeah, that's in the court record. Just everything's done. You just don't have to worry about it. It's going to be filed. Don't, you know, it's all done. It's in the record. Okay, see you later. Go home. She said, okay. So she said the paperwork will be ready. The judge said the paperwork will be ready in, you know, tomorrow. So the next day she goes down to the courthouse, gets the paperwork. Guess what? Not changed. So yeah, the courts, the law can do whatever they wish. But they're taking on a karmic debt. They are taking on that debt. Now she went back and she got it changed again. But what we're going into is not going to be easy. And that's why I really believe that we have to set our intention on who we are as individuals, what we believe, and how sincere and faithful are we in that devotion to that belief. Because I believe, and this is just me again, and then, you know, I'm sharing it, right? That is what is going to either get us to the next level spiritually and karmically, or what's going to make us come back again to this realm to do it all over again. Because as we go through this next occult area that we're going to talk about, I'd like everybody to really think about, as Russell talks about, do you really view this reality we have today as a cinematic movie that's not reality? That you have a divinity and a sovereignty that is outside what we experience daily. And how real is that to you? Because it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that I, you know, practice what I preach to the T, right? Because it is difficult. But the more that I think we work together, the more we talk together, the more that we share, our ideas. Jung called it a zeitgeist, I think. Maybe it was Freud too. But what that is kind of like the feeling of the time, the feeling of the age that is shared by the collective conscious. And we know there's one out there right now that may be contrary to what we're talking about, but I believe that we can actually begin to form our own energy, by staying collective and staying within ourselves and beginning to develop a stronger sense of devotion to what each of us believe and feel. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about Jung. He's next. So with Jung, Carl Jung had this idea called the personal myth. And so what happened with Jung, I don't think I really covered it much, but there was Freud, and Freud was like, the big number A1 doctor. He was, the big viral guy of the time, right? Everybody's listening to Freud. He was big. Well, Jung comes along and Freud says, you're going to be my successor. And Jung says, great, And so he starts working with Jung, but he begins to have different ideas than Freud. He doesn't buy into the whole everything's about sex, everything's about my Oedipus complex, everything's not about my mother and all that. And he began to actually diverge from that. Well, as he did that, he began to actually get into his theses. Jung's thesis was on Spiritism, which was a movement that was going on in the late 1800s. And his cousin was a Spiritist. She was a medium. And so his doctoral thesis was on Spiritism. So he was kind of bent that way anyway. But he also started getting into dream work, and he started getting into some other things, and he kind of went a little bit schizophrenic. He had a split in his personality. And that's where he began to write the red book and the black books. I don't know if everybody's ever read those, where he began to actually like draw things from his subconscious mind. Very great. If you ever get a chance to look at the red book, it's amazing. And they weren't published until after his death. But within that, he actually had like this schism where he became two people. He actually had almost like a spirit guide that he would talk about that would give him certain things. And had he shared any of this stuff at the time he was actually in practice, he probably would have lost his license. So he stayed very quiet about a lot of it. But he was very influential in the psychology movements. And so this is what we're going to talk about here is when he's 83 years old and he's reflecting back on his life. Okay. Jung begins memories, dreams, reflection, his autobiography. Thus it is that I have now undertaken in my 83rd year to tell my personal myth. After leading the psycho-spiritual field for decades, Jung realizes that his view of the expanse of his life journey is a myth. Whatever stories and elaborate labels we may summon, our story remains a personal myth. Now, when we say a myth, does that mean that it's not real? Isn't that really what Russell's saying? That it's all an illusion? So if what Russell's saying is true, that everything we experience, everything we see is an illusion, then whatever we reflect back on in our lives is almost, to say, a myth, a personal myth. But it does have consequence, because that myth, just as when you read about any like Odysseus or Ulysses or any of those stories, Perseus, yeah, are they myths? Well, they are, but they also form who we are as humans, and they also have archetypes embedded in them that we relate to. So let's move on a little bit with this. So a personal mythology is a couple of things. It's a kind of fiction of each individual's everyday life via the unconscious internalization of their experiences. But in a more open interpretation of Jung's documented and studied experiences, a personal mythology is the amalgamation of all the events, symbols, images, icons, and stories that have been played before us in the activity of our unconscious mind through our dreams, transcendental experiences, original artworks, and imaginative hiatus into our minds. So Jung was not, what you'd call a particularly religious man. His father was a pastor, but he really had no main religion that he was faithful to, or so he was kind of a bobber on the water. He kind of went where the tide took him. He did have to return one of the texts from one of the Gnostic texts from the I want to say Hammurabi library, but that's not it. It's the library down there, which was they found for the Gnostics, the Nag Hammadi library. He had actually bought one of the texts from there on the black market and had to return it later. So he was very influenced by some of these writings. He also went to Arizona and met with some Hopi, either Hopi or Navajo elders, and struck up a friendship with them. And he also went around Africa and so on and studied a lot of traditional and tribal culture. So he was searching for his identity and for his purpose and for his philosophy. So the sooner that we might begin to develop our philosophy, we may not become corks that bob on the water and have to go through some of the things that he's doing. We may be able to actually have, within us, a personal myth, but a myth that has meaning, a myth that actually has purpose, and that when we get to the end, we don't reflect back and see it so much as an illusion, but as a journey that we were the commanders of, rather than just a passenger on the ride. So I added this little last point here. I just put each individual's personal myth is the main feature on their projection of reality on the cosmic cinema screen. When the show is over, the title will be given as Your Personal Myth for This Incarnation. It must be a myth, for it is an illusion, according to Russell. So what you're viewing, if you don't actually have intent for what you're viewing, and this is where we get into Russell, then the title will appear at the end, because you've given it no title as you were watching it. The title will be given for you at the end. So what I'm trying to do in some of these discussions is for you to actually begin to think about what is your title for your personal myth. What is the purpose of it? That doesn't mean it can't change, because, even within your cinema, you have different acts, right? Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. They may change, but at least those acts you had purpose and meaning for why you were in those acts. They weren't just random. And so that's why I'm trying to share some of these different concepts, some of these different ideas, some of these different initiations, so that we can stand in that, because to me, that's spiritual sovereignty. That we can stand in our purpose, we can stand in our devotion, we can stand in what we believe is our philosophy of life and nature. And so anybody have anything to say about that? I don't want to go on just go on a tirade here.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
What's the significance of having a title for it?
Because that actually gives you purpose. If you don't have a title for your life, if you don't say, this is Brian's myth, and then you're really just the passenger. And you can be the passenger. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, is it going to, if our purpose is to move to this next level, this next realm, then we need purpose. I think that when we listen to G.G. Jung or some of these other people, even Steiner will talk about this, that some of the ideas that the early occultists had was trying to keep what they had learned in this incarnation to take with them to the next. So they didn't have to start from scratch every time. And they actually, and Steiner gets kind of very heavy into it about how that can be done. And some of us may have that as we begin to meditate, as we begin to awaken. And there's people who say they can, that as they've awakened, they've actually begun to remember who they were in the past.
It's like that that movie Memento. If you ever saw that, that's fascinating film, and it's about a guy. It's a kind of a murder mystery, whodunit, but the catch is that he has amnesia every I forget what the time frames, maybe 5 minutes or 10, maybe it's like more like half an hour, but in the scenes it's compressed shorter. And so he's constantly trying to figure out how to recreate what had happened to him before. And he does all kinds of things, like he tattoos stuff onto his body, but in the beginning of every segment, he's completely lost to it. And he uses the clues that he's left for himself to rediscover, to get himself back to that moment of awareness. And then with whatever remaining time before he blacks out again and goes into amnesia, he tries to further it a little bit more. And the whole movie is played in reverse. So you're kind of uncovering his journey and going back to the beginning with him to find out what actually happened. It's really cool.
And that's really what the purpose of the mystery schools are.
Mm-hmm.
To write down, to capture that knowledge so that we can relearn these and maybe awaken to these ideas that have been lost. So it's almost like every time we were reborn to this earth, we do, I think Steiner calls it the draft of forgetfulness, that we take. And so as we reincarnate because of, and what Steiner actually says is in earlier times, in earlier ages, we actually had much more of a feeling of this, that we actually could feel this more, but because of our bodies, as we become denser and actually more polluted, that we don't have that anymore, and that we are becoming more and more conscious. It's just part of our evolution. We're going to talk about that a little bit more too here as we move on to the occult. So these are some of the things I want you to be thinking about, start to be mulling around in your mind as we move on to the next, until we move on into this occult that we're going to talk about.
One quick question, Will, when you're reading that middle paragraph that you have up on the screen, it made me think, is that like, are those events, symbols, images, icons, those are the Akashic records, right? Like
they can be Akashic records. They can actually be symbols. They can be, like when you look at Sanskrit or Hebrew language, or when you look at some of the symbols that are out there, are the archetypical. What is the cross?
Well, I was thinking maybe those are the kind of the mechanisms by which we write into the records through that language. Yeah.
And again, I think it goes back to, and again, this is my kind of my own idea from what I've learned, is that the Akashic record only captures those things which are of source, and which are ideal, and which are divine. That's why they're creating the internet, to capture the I don't know, the trashic records for the next humanism inversion, right? So
I have the same concept in what I studied. All the good, only good, meaning that has a divine, I guess, action, if you like, that comes from a good place, will make it in the causal body. So when we reincarnate, we still have that stored, like all the good stuff, and we can access it when we remember who we are, and go from there, kind of thing. So it's like a storehouse. So it's kind of like what you said. Anyway.
Yes, and
Yeah, the causal body.
Mhm.
It's so when people say, well, when I disintegrate, our body leaves, where does it go? Well, we're still, there's still this thing that keeps who we are. But the personality, if you like, the life we lead, that disappeared, because every time we come back, we could be a total different, we could be set in a different situation, if you like.
Yes.
I could have been like a big herbalist in Celtic time, but now I'm called to do something else, to learn something else, like to progress. So yeah, I could go in the past and become that again. But once you know more about yourself, you end up choosing something that's reversing the wheel, they call it. Like you'll go against the stream. Anyway.
Yes.
Okay. To my question about the reason for the handle, maybe the handle is a way of remembering the previous personal myth.
Yeah, and that can be, and I guess it comes back to, the difference between cosmogony and cosmology was that cosmogony had purpose, why we here. I think if you believe that that within a cosmology you have a purpose and a reason for being here, then the better title you have, I wouldn't say the better, but at least that you realize there's a title to your life. That title is your purpose. Otherwise, you end up at the end and my purpose was whatever I did. There was no reason, there was no meaning, it was just, the same thing that, any other animal will do. And that's what really makes us different than an animal. Animals don't really have a purpose. They just are.
Okay.
Most people know that they want to find that title. Give it a.
But they're
challenging.
But they're afraid to, because they're afraid they're going to fail, maybe. But that's okay. That's okay. Failure is not. It's sad that we have failure or missing the mark, as some people call it even sin, right? Missing the mark is what they said was the definition of sin, where it's really just a learning experience. And the people that fail often learn more than those that are successful all the time. I shouldn't say they're successful, but are successful once stop, because they don't begin to realize what it was, and they never really put the benefit on source or God too. So again, I believe that the title is the purpose, is the reason that when you come up with your cosmology, which is your philosophy, which then may be your religiosity, that is your purpose. And that is the title to your cinematic screen that you're projecting. Okay? So we're going to go on and start into our occult journey. Everybody get excited? All right. Hope I didn't build it up too much. Let's go back to the questions and see what's so. Per occultism, by what is the universe ruled, and what is the greatest of these? And again, this is from Manly P. Hall's work. These are not my words. These are from Manly P. Hall's work on Blavatsky's work of the Secret Doctrine. So let's go see what Manly P. Hall believed that came from the Secret Doctrine for this question, because he wrote the question himself, actually. So first of all, let's look at occult. We talked about this earlier. It's not about black magic and witches and Satan. It's about not easily apprehended or understood, hidden or secret. So maybe that's why Blavatsky called it the Secret Doctrine, right? It was secret. So occultists teach that the universe is governed by intelligence, love, and law. And the greatest of these is law. Love and intelligence serve law, ornamenting it and beautifying it. And law serves all things impartially. Millions of intelligences, say it one more time, millions of intelligences make manifest the intricacies of natural law. All things flourish when they abide in law. All things perish when they disregard law or seek to break its eternal power. So again, this is what Manly V. Hall wrote was in the Secret Doctrine. Is anybody surprised that the greatest of these is law?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part you just said
I
there.
said, is anyone surprised that it says that the greatest of these, of intelligence, love, and law, that the greatest is law?
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, I think I would have probably said love, you know, and especially thinking through the Russell lens. I think that, you know, thinking about light and probably in my mind making an equivalence to light and love. So yeah, that was a little bit of a surprising piece for me.
Yeah, for me, the phraseology is the same as what Paul or St. Paul, whatever, used when he said the greatest of these is love,
Mhm.
in a similar sort of comparison, not the same.
For me, when I see law, I think of, I guess I think of the will of God,
Mhm.
the highest will, which is pure reason, which is, well, that could be intelligence, but it's yeah, love comes after, but the you know, if we go with the law of the universe, anyways, that's what I get from this.
Well, we're talking about the law of cause and effect.
We're talking about lots of laws, and we're going to get into the different.
Yeah,
We're going to
yeah.
get into the 7 laws that Blavatsky talks about.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that. The reason that I found this, you know, very thought-provoking, right, is because it does say law, and I think if you're a Christian, you've always read the words of Jesus too, which is the greatest of these is love, maybe. We're going to talk a little bit about that too, and where that might come from. But the biggest thing here is that love and intelligence ornament the law, right? But the law serves all things impartially. Does love serve all things impartially? Any answers? Any?
What did you just say?
Does law? It says here that the law serves all things impartially.
Mm-hmm.
Does love serve all things impartially? Or what most humans believe is love serve all things impartially?
Yeah, most humans believe that love is based upon works. You get a reward or not.
I mean, if this is your daughter and this is some person you've never met before in a third world country, does your love extend to both equally?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, right? I'm not saying theory. I'm saying honestly.
Yeah.
Does love serve all impartially? So that may be why law is the number 1, because it is impartial.
There you go. Universal.
It all things perish when they disregard the law.
I like that last part here. I've seen this before, maybe in the Secret Doctrine or something about if we disregard the law, you know, we're gonna be perished. Like, it's true. Like, and I'm not saying in a bad way. It's just that if you're constantly doing not what's your real self is calling you to do,
Mhm.
yeah, you're gonna break down. Okay, one way or another. You'll get into a crisis of some kind. So I think it's right, like about, you know. So
And-
good to understand. If we can understand more about how the universe works, and you know, we figure it out.
And that's kind of why when I began to see this, it really began to, spark my interest in spiritual sovereignty and really what does that mean? What's that mean to me? What is the highest in my life? What is the highest? How is my universe governed? Is it by love? Because I've seen love work both ways in life. See a pimp beat up his girl and say, "I love you, baby." No, you don't love her. There's no love there. Oftentimes we say we love things that we don't love, and it can work both ways. So I think it's very interesting here that it's saying that law, right? Spiritual sovereignty, law, that what we're governed in is the highest, and that our intelligence and our love adorn that law. And and then this gets back to a little bit what you were speaking about earlier, Giselle, about those people who are saying they're not going to accept the religious exemption. That is not the law. Those people that are not doing that, they are going to take on a karmic debt.
Yes, they will.
They're going to take on karmic debt, and that's why if we hold them accountable by saying, "No, here's my religious exemption. Okay, if you want to arrest me or not put me in school, that's fine. But I am not going to just say that it's okay. I'm not going to do it with my consent." And I hope I don't know if we're going to get banned for all this, but I'm not preaching anything, just that it is the law, right? And that you have those rights. And I know that here they're saying that there is a religious, they will accept a religious exemption. So, because I believe they know that they don't want to take on this karmic debt. So we may have to stand a little bit in our power. And when we stand in our power and we stand in the law, it also benefits those who are on the other side because you're not allowing them to take on that karmic debt.
And they may not know what they're doing.
And that's exactly right. But if we just go along with it, then they are going to take on the karmic debt because they are breaking the law.
One of the Cuorten that I work with, she's in Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you the story. She walks her dogs to the little park in Amsterdam. Anyways, all of a sudden she sees sign like, I can't remember, you can't have your dog off leash. And then there's all these rules that are coming, harder or something. Anyway, the enforcers come in, 3 of them. Anyway, and so she's doing the sovereign courts right now. So she said, "I am Mirella." And she talked to them, and then she explained to the enforcers what their real purpose should be. Mm-hmm. And if you start talking to me about my dog having to be on a leash, next thing you know, you'll be not any further than when the Nazis said you have to take this bus and take you away or something. Or he says, "Have you ever thought," she put it back to them, "have you thought about what your role is here? Why did you take this job? And what is it leading it to?" Anyway, everybody stopped around her with all the dogs, and everybody had a great conversation. The 3 enforcers and all the people around. Anyway, I thought that was kind of neat.
And it takes that one person, just like the old man, right? The older gent in the video we saw, to stand up and say no.
And they all took their dogs off the leash, right?
They had the dogs off the leash. It's just these people came to give them fines.
To enforce.
Yeah, whatever. But it was a new law, whatever was the new rule, whatever it was, there was some new rule. And they had talked to each other. We have to watch for these enforcers. They're going to come any minute. Sure enough, they're right there. So she's standing in her way. She says, "I am Mirella." Woman. What, because she only did module 1 of the course, and she's already applying it. Wow.
Yes, and there are great tools out there that are being brought forth. I mean, we're very lucky that the community that we're in, that we have people that are bringing forth some great tools that are, you know, the things we're saying aren't radical, right? They're just basically using our know muscle, which we're not using right now. That's all it is. So any more comments on what is the universe rule before we move on to the next question? Any comments? All right, get to question number 4. So this is kind of back to what you were asking, Brian. So what are the fundamental laws and how do they compare to Russell's concepts? Okay, let's go down here to these laws. So the fundamental laws are evolution, the law of evolution. All things grow and unfold. Second law is cause and effect. Every effect is measured by its cause. And again, these are the laws, the 7 universal laws that are stated in the Secret Doctrine. All right, when you look up, when you Google search laws, you can get 7, you can get 12, you can get all different numbers. But I'm taking these from the Secret Doctrine. I'm taking these from Manly P. Hall's review of the Secret Doctrine, and he has 7. So that's what these are about. Other people may have more, may have less. The third is reincarnation. Life returns to form again and again in the process of unfoldment. The fourth is vibration. Everything in nature is moving. The fifth is polarity. Fifth or fourth? No, this is the fourth. Polarity. All things manifest through positive and negative poles. Next is equilibrium. Perfection is a state of balance with its victory over the opposites. Compensation. Action is rewarded by its own reaction. And periodicity. For every period of activity, there must follow a period of inactivity. So as we read through these laws, are there any that you disagree with? Or is there any here that you don't think align with what Russell's, with what we've learned in The Secret of Light, of what Walter Russell teaches us in The Secret of Light and speaks about?
Well, I think you said before when we were studying The Secret of Light, this thing about the positive and negative poles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe not, eh? But, you know.
Yeah, those last 4 or 5, they're really all related.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in that Russell stuff too. The vibration and with polarities and the balance and equilibrium coming up with and then having a period up and a period down. I was like, yeah.
And that's also the evolution, right? All things grow and unfold, right? We have the wave as we grow, right? This is, you know, radiation, right? And we have concentration. All things grow and evolve. And evolution is a big, now this is not, you know, us coming from monkeys, right? That's not
Right.
the evolution they talk about here. It's just that all things are in a constant state of change, that they grow and they unfold. So, you know, if anyone says, I just want to stay where I'm at, that is not a reality. You are going to continue to change and grow. In what direction really depends on what part of the polarity you're in and what part of the period you're in, right? You may become, I mean, as you move from activity to inactivity, it's not like it's all of a sudden you're active and then you stop. You know, right? It's a wave that's happened. When you're a child, you may be less active, right? And you go and active and come back down as you age, you become more, you become inactive more. And vibration, everything in nature is moving. Vibration is really the science that's behind Rife technology, where he actually went through and determined the frequency for all living organisms and what they were vibrating at. And his theory was that if you could match that frequency or have it a little bit off, that you could actually make that organism vibrate to death through resonance. So that's the way he believed that you could kill cancers and other pathogens, was if you found the resonance and the vibration, what he calls the frequency of that organism, that you could then attack that organism by making it vibrate itself to death, to where it became so active that because you use a carrier wave.
Who was that?
That was Royal Rife, who did the Rife machines, which was he actually cured cancer supposedly in the 20s, and then they took all his equipment and destroyed it. But he used a very special microscope that he invented to actually see the vibration and to calibrate the vibration of organisms.
Now I have another observation. The evolution, if evolution is just growing and unfolding,
Mhm.
what about the degeneration and
Well, again, you're evolving into a new being, right? We look at it as life and death, right? But are we really dying, or are we evolving and unfolding into a new being, a new reality? Is death?
along the wave pattern, we're going from here to there?
Yeah, we're going from here to there, but we're evolving along the whole way.
Yeah, okay.
You know, things grow and unfold. So even though our body, our physical body, may not be growing, right? Is your spiritual body growing? Well, some people say that it is. I mean, it's becoming. As you age, you should your spiritual body should almost be growing away and out of your physical body, so that when the time comes, that transition is not so painful.
Okay.
And that's really what some of the mystics taught, was that as you age, you may become more spiritually aware, because that is where you're evolving into that next stage. You're growing actually in that direction now, towards the spiritual body more. So any more comments on the fundamental laws before we move on?
There was, as you said, there's different different people have different lists of these. The first that I came across was earlier this year, and I had discovered Mark Passio's natural law lectures, and I thought they were just fascinating. I was just thinking about them now. I pulled them up because I wanted to remember what his were. One that particularly struck me was mentalism, and because it was basically the foundation of free will. And I was looking at this list and don't know where that fits into here. And I thought that's because everything else, well, yeah, I mean, that comes down to like, who are we and how are we engaging?
Well, again,
and driving our realities.
And mentalism is really the idea that all is mind, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what Russell teaches, right? That there is that
Yeah.
God is a cosmic mind. Now, whether or not that's a law or whether or not that's a realization, I don't know. It almost gets back to what Russell says, is that there was no beginning, it always was, right? So is that a law, or is that just an is? It is mind. And that's what feeds all things. So, because within the law of mentalism, is the law that everything is mental? Is that really a law, or is that just a what is?
I always visualized it like, you have a still body of water and you drop a drop of ink into it, and the ink penetrates and disturbs the surface and makes its way through. And that drop of ink is like a thought that goes in and changes the that field that maybe before that didn't have any.
Mhm.
It was just still, right? And so
Mhm.
that's how I've kind of perceived our
Mhm.
interaction with that pure light field.
And again, Passio came long after the Secret Doctrine, right?
Oh yeah, and he, I mean, he didn't put a bibliography together for this, but
Yeah.
he certainly did not claim to come up with any of this. He made it very clear that this was things that he had learned from a lot of his own research.
And again, when I was looking at the fundamental laws, I kind of went down a little bit of that path of mentalism, but what I'm trying to stick with right now is, what did the mystery schools teach over the eons, and what were the foundations for some of the people that we study? Doesn't mean that they're not going to change, right? Doesn't mean that they're not going to evolve. And even Steiner and anybody or Russell, or most people who taught a lot of the occult knowledge, knew that things would change. And that is one of the current knocks, I believe, on mystery schools of the past, is that they don't really relate to our present condition. Because we, as humans, have evolved over time, right? We've become much more mental, just by bringing up that, now Passio has mentalism within his laws. We've become much more mental. That's what Steiner predicted, that our minds will begin to overrun our other subtle bodies, and it will become very dominant within our culture, our mental aspect. We will look to our minds to solve all things.
Yeah. Well, mentalism or the other ones, I think one of the, I don't want to dwell on it too long, but
I think it's good.
It's kind of interesting. Why are there different lists? Why is it so difficult to get at the root laws? Like everybody has a different interpretation. Everybody has a different set of lists. How do we determine that something is a law versus not? It's kind of a meta question that.
Besides the mentalism, how many does he have besides mentalism?
He has. I can read them out very quickly if you're interested.
Yeah.
Mentalism, correspondence, which that's as above, so below, which I'm not quite sure what that maps to here. He's got vibration, polarity, rhythm, which, and I think does he also have periodicity? Let me see. No, maybe. So rhythm is periodicity, I would say, right? That's kind of the same concept. Cause and effect. And then gender, which I find it interesting that he has, because that always struck me as.
Does he have polarity, or does he put in gender?
He has polarity as well. So it's interesting that gender is there as a separate one than polarity, because to me it seems like a nuanced aspect of polarity. And then he has a lost eighth principle, which I like a lot. It's care. He calls it the generative principle. Maybe that's evolution.
The only one that he's really not covering is reincarnation, right? And he's put in the mentalism and as above, so below.
Right.
Right. Which could almost be cause and effect in a sense, but
he has that different though. I mean, as a separate one. But then again, he has polarity and gender, which so it's just interesting. Like and I want to go back and look at that a little bit more and understand why he chose those.
And the question is because we're all different, right? That's why we're not going to have maybe all the same lists, right? And each person. I mean, I don't know if it's crucial that we all believe in the fundamental laws in terms of the exact ones, but to realize there is fundamental laws and that laws rule. Now, I don't know if Mark Passio says that he believes that laws govern the universe.
Well, I think with this though, if it is fundamental, and and if these are fundamental laws, there's a foundation there. So it shouldn't be a relativistic thing where we each have our own set of laws.
Well, Mark Passio changed them, right? Because these were in place long before he ever came to being, unless he intuited.
Oh yeah, and it's not just him. I've seen these lists elsewhere too, and I find deviations and changes. So it's just that's just an open question that I've had.
Well, again,
where do these come from, and how do we validate them and think about them?
It's hard to sell books if it's just the same thing that Blavatsky wrote. Yeah, it's hard to have a following or have a uniqueness if you're just regurgitating the same thing. So,
but even with that, like trying to understand how she came up with these and how do we?
She came up with these through going to the mystery schools throughout the world, and these are what the mystery schools were teaching. That's how she came up with them. And as we get into this, we're going to get into it a little bit more, because as we get into, again, we're just looking at right now what Manly P. Hall said, what Blavatsky said, and what the occultism at this time, which if you pull out when the Secret Doctrine was written, which was about 1910, 1920, I believe. It might have been earlier. It might have been in the 1800s, late 1800s. This is what was being produced at that time from those mystery schools that Blavatsky visited, and through the three masters. She worked with three masters who were supposed to be like the ascended masters, and so they were giving her this knowledge that had been carried on for millennia. And at this time, they decided to make this knowledge public, because the world was beginning to go in such a manner, in a skew, that they were afraid that we would be in the situation we are today. That they saw that we were getting into wars, that they were becoming mechanized, that we were getting to a point where we could destroy the human race. And the occult schools decided that they needed to make this no longer occult, no longer hidden, but to actually bring it forth to the public so that they may change the trajectory they were on. And that's why, and that's where it came from, and that's why it was published. Okay? Any more questions or comments on this before we move on to the next? Because the next one's going to directly apply to this also.
Yeah, I was thinking that also the language, obviously languages evolve and change over time, and words are, in a sense, always a bit deficient in nailing the nail on the head. And so that may explain why we have all these different lists with different words describing fundamental stuff. I don't know, just a thought.
And again, what we're capturing here is a period in time of what was being brought forth from the mystery schools, from millennia of learning, right? And I don't. I mean, we're talking from the time of Lemuria.
Oh well, okay, but
we're talking long ago. Supposedly is where this information is coming from.
Yeah,
it's being captured in the Tibetan temples and monasteries and that kind of thing. So let's go on to this next question here. How does the doctrine of grace reconcile with natural law? And the reason I bring this up is because as you begin to study grace, which came from both Calvinism and Arminianism, agree that the question of the resistibility of grace is inexorably bound up with the theological system's view of the sovereignty of God. Remember, we got back to the slide of the sovereignty of God in one of the first ones? The fundamental question is whether God can allow individuals to accept or reject his grace and yet remain sovereign. If so, then grace can be resistible. If not, then grace is irresistible. Prevenient grace, particularly associated with Arminianism, which teaches that the offer of salvation through grace does not act irresistibly in a pure cause-effect deterministic method, but rather in an influence and response fashion that can be both freely accepted and freely defined. So if there is law in the world, can grace be extended by God if law is impartial? And is there any?
Can I ask a
Yeah.
dummy question?
Yes.
What is grace?
Oh, okay. So within the Christian religion, we are those that believe in Christ can be granted grace, which means that even though you are a sinner all the time, that you cannot be a righteous man because of your sinful nature. You are given grace by God to overlook your sins or your behavior. Otherwise, there's no way you could maintain the law. Because within that system, within the Judaic system, the law is based on action, on what you do or don't do, or how you do it. It's not like these laws of resonance. I mean, there's thousands and millions and hundreds of laws, right? And they write more and more all the time. But there is a doctrine called the Doctrine of Grace, which, and the reason I just bring this up is it talks about a little bit about the sovereignty of God, and that's kind of what our study is on here.
Mhm.
And so, can God forgive us of our sins, which is actually kind of like a karmic thing, and then who does he choose to forgive? And that's what this is kind of a little bit talking about. If his grace is sovereign, then it cannot be accepted or rejected, right? Which would go against the laws of impartiality, right? Because grace would have to be administered through love, which may or may not have partiality, not under law. So the theory is that if you believe in Jesus, you're afforded grace, and if you don't, then you can't have grace. That's kind of what the church said. So again, I'm just kind of looking at this saying, and again, if you don't know what grace is, but it has to do with God's sovereignty and whether or not it can be a resistible, or if it's irresistible, meaning that you can reject God's grace, right? If you can reject God's grace, then God isn't sovereign in a sense. If grace is given, it needs to be given to all, regardless of whatever they do, or it's resistible, meaning that I don't have to accept it by doing something or other. So it really has to do with God's sovereignty.
I've never studied this at all.
Okay.
Just so you know,
Okay.
never even. Now maybe it's because I was brought up in French. Maybe it's a different word, but that hasn't really come up.
Okay.
This idea of grace. It's like saying when you're praying, you're gonna. There's different ways to pray. People would say, well, you're not praying for yourself, or I don't know. I'm not sure. This whole
Well,
grace thing.
have you ever heard the song Amazing Grace? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound
Yeah,
that
but
saved a wretch like me. Have you heard
yeah,
that song?
yeah.
That's
Again,
what grace is.
okay. Well, it's all around, being saved or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see it that way for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I'm just
looking
Yeah.
at that. I'm just trying to get this thing in my mind,
Mhm.
and yeah.
because this can become part of your cosmology, your religious, and your philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's move on.
Repentance is close to this concept, right? Repentance is kind of,
Well, yes. I mean, grace can be, but grace is extended by God, not by us, right? I mean, it can
I
be.
see.
We can actually give other people grace. Say like I have, and this gets into, I think, a little bit about the sovereignty. The reason I bring this up again, there's the idea of the trespass, and the trespass can be against another individual. So Giselle comes over and she takes my hamburger off my plate without asking and goes and eats it. I can go over and I can go beat her up and take my hamburger back, or I can say I'm gonna extend grace to Giselle and say she can have it. She needed it more than I. So
Okay.
I'm extending her grace, saying that I am not going to hold her accountable, or I'm not going to hold her liable or whatever for the trespass that she's done against me. I'm going to give her grace and forgiveness.
So an example of God's grace would be, I'm thinking, isn't it like if there was 3 just men in one town, that town would be saved?
Correct.
Remember that?
Yes, that's what
Because
Lot.
was it Babylon or
No,
whatever
it
the
was
other,
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah? They said if there was only, if he could find 3 pure hearts in there, or 3 pure men, he will not destroy them all.
Yeah.
Basically. So that was like the grace. I'm thinking of
Exactly.
the higher.
That is the grace.
That
correct.
I'm thinking, but
That is correct. That's a good example. But it will serve it will become part of our cosmology as we look to the universe and look to law, because if law has grace, then law is not really impartial. Unless it's irresistible, then everybody has it. And there is no karma that will come back on you, because there is no negative force in life. It's all everybody's forgiven, right? So it's a concept that you may encounter as you look at your sovereignty, as you look at your cosmology, that you may want to deal with or think about.
So that explains why the Christian circles that I've circulated within don't like the word karma.
No, not if you're a Christian, because you're given grace by God.
Never talked about karma. They avoid a word.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
they're
plus,
avoiding responsibility.
But also karma goes back to the second law, or the third law, which is reincarnation. They talk about sin, right? Sin and death. And within karma, you have the ability to actually relive that and repay that debt through your next life. That's the karmic debt. Within Christianity, you die and go to hell, and you're done. You only get one shot.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that that was taken out of the creed or whatever, intentionally or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But reincarnation was talked about when he said, St. John the Baptist, you've seen him before.
Mm-hmm.
He was Elijah or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So he was telling us reincarnation, but the church took it out.
Mm-hmm.
So they brought everybody on this idea that you've got only one life and you better make it good.
And that way we all fear death.
Yeah, fear.
Do what the Romans tell us to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good conversation on grace there. Okay, so we already did what is the greatest natural law. So who are the rulers of the race? This is which of the fundamental laws is the most important. So what's said here is the law of evolution is the first and fundamental law of nature. In every sphere of activity, conscious and unconscious, it rules gods, men, beasts alike. It is the reason for all things and in itself is a reward for all things. So within that, I kind of pulled up this diagram from Walter Russell, which talks about the evolution of mass. Electricity evolves mass into the form of a true sphere, and magnetism devolves it into a plane. The process is orderly and periodic. So right there, we got quite a few laws within Russell's description of evolution.
Hmm.
So this kind of gets back to some of our conversations about flat Earth and spheric Earth. Maybe it depends on what periodic that planet's in.
Yeah.
If it's in a periodic where it's turning into a sphere, it's a sphere. If it's in a periodic where it's a plane, it's a plane. Right? So all things are periodic. That's why they say, like Saturn has its rings, because it is turning into a plane, and so it's actually dissipating in the middle. It's an older planet. I don't know about Earth. But what Russell's saying is that they all turn into spheres, but the fundamental law, the law of evolution, is the first and fundamental law of nature, which is funny because, as Jeremy said in the current Mark Passio, he doesn't even have the law of evolution as a law. Correct, Jeremy?
Who's?
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute.
Okay. So why do you think that they say the law of evolution is the first and fundamental law of nature in every sphere of activity, conscious and unconscious?
I'm thinking growth of consciousness for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as we read this too down here, electricity evolves mass into the form of a true sphere, and magnetism evolves it into a plane in the process ordered. So within this law of evolution, the other laws reside. Right? All these other laws of resonance and periodic and polarity and all those other things are what reside to actually make evolution occur.
So would you consider it a fundamental then, or a byproduct of the combination of the other laws?
Well, I would actually consider it a law, but I would also say that it's as they say here, the first and fundamental, because every sphere of activity encompasses the law of evolution, no matter what it is. Now, and I'm not saying that all things don't have resonance and all that, but the goal of the laws is for evolution, is for change, is for the constant, within the wave. So the wave is the evolution, right? The evolving. And within that wave lies the resonance, lies the polarity, lies all these things. But the purpose is the evolution. What Russell may say, it's in the creation, right? In the wave lies the secret of creation. But creation is always unfolding, right? It's not as we believe that we're born and we die and we go away, right? We born, we die, we may go to someplace else. The consciousness maintains, it goes again. It may even evolve to a different sphere, a different plane, a higher plane. It may stay like with G.G. Jung in the 8th sphere and not evolve and have to go through other lessons. Who knows? But there is a constant evolution. It unfolds and grows, but it may devolve if we don't take care of it, if we don't have purpose, we don't have desire, if we don't want to grow. Where does our desire play within these fundamental laws, as Russell says? Which we call the will, we call desire, we can call it the will, we can call it all those other things. Getting back to Brian's question is, why does it matter to have a title? The title is the will. The title is the desire. The desire is the purpose.
It's kind of what a thought is too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the intention.
Mm-hmm. We set the intention. What we intend, we create. Right.
As we as we go forward in life, we reflect, our intention gets clearer.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
And that's why I think that what, as Russell says, what we're projecting on that screen is what we intend. Are we projecting our conscious thoughts on the screen? Are we projecting our unconscious thoughts on the screen? Are we projecting our animal instincts on that screen? What are we projecting? What are we creating? Right? What is our intent? What is our title? What are we going to give that?
Intention, but also how we're relating to other people. Relationship.
Well, I would say, again, it gets back to Steiner's quote. Okay, the idea is if we, and I think this is really where we are today a little bit in our world, and it's what I struggle with. And not to say that what I'm saying is true. Okay, I'm just saying it's what I struggle with, right? Is that when we go back to this, to the fundamental laws, right? Where's that at? That, is governed by intelligence, love, and law. The greatest of these is law, right? So if I'm a being and I'm trying to adhere to the law, right, which is universal law as I see it, but it's adorned with intelligence and love. At some point, the people on the outside of me, I mean, if I was in Nazi Germany, would I want to be with the group? Would I care what those people thought of me? Would I want to be part of that? Would I care that they didn't want me because I'm saying, don't send the Jews to concentration camp, don't Heil Hitler, don't do these things? Would that desire to have relationship with those people, right, to have them accept me or be part of that, overrule what my inside law told me was right and wrong? Doesn't mean I don't care about them, doesn't mean I don't, but my relationship is a two-sided exchange, right? I can stand in my law and my presence. That doesn't mean that the people on the outside have to accept that, because what I have is impartial. What they put out is partial, right? It has partiality. They're saying that you have to believe what I believe, you have to think what I think, you have to do what I do, you have to say what I say in order to have a relationship with me.
We have to rise above this herd mentality.
Well, that's what so
No, we know we have
yeah.
to.
And so that's what I'm trying to get into, though, with relationship, right? I mean, a lot of times it's a difficult thing because as we are a minority, right? I would say in the current culture, as far as I can see, and who knows really? I have no idea, because the only way that we could do that is through metrics and through what the media is telling us, and so who knows how many people are thinking like we are? I do not know. But from what I see in public, it's I think it's rather funny, because there's only a few people that when I talk to now don't accept what I say now. But again, that could be law of attraction. That could be, who I choose to speak to. So who knows? But it does seem that there's many more people who are beginning to believe that the current way we live is not working for them or for the planet. And they are looking for a different way.
Yeah, we are recognizing each other.
Mm-hmm.
Every day I'm finding people, in my neighborhood, but, to all the things. Yeah, definitely.
When you're alone, though, it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And the Japanese have a phrase for that: the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm sure a lot of people feel. And there's many, as you go along this journey, like what you're saying, like the nail sticking out further and further.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to have conversation with my family to try and explain where I stand, but I don't dare go into how, where I'm at today. I don't dare touch any of that because it's such it's sticking out so far, it wouldn't make any sense. So I try to go back to where I was a year ago or a year and a half ago and just, just try to like focus on some of these basic questions, which have taken new form, but, not so far away from where everybody else is at. But it is hard to know. Yeah.
And that's why it's when we stand in the law, right? Because it does not, because it doesn't show prejudice. That's where our love and intelligence comes in to help us relate. And Jung called this the relating function. And, the way I was when I was younger, I would just tell them, hey, you're full of crap, right? Now I wouldn't do that, right? I would just say, well, this is what I believe, take it as it resonates. You hear that a lot in different things on YouTube with tarot readers or whatever, take it as it resonates. If it doesn't resonate, that's fine. But we do want to have, I believe, with especially our family, this resonance, this resonance that they think as we do, they feel as we do, because we want that closeness. And, I don't have any answers for that, right? I've gone through my own struggles because of what I believe and, seeking resonance and not finding it. But at some point, this is what this time is going to come down to, right? It's going to come down to our personal myth, our cosmology. And just as with Loki and the man that stood up, as Brian pointed out, what are you going to do when Loki shows up? What are you going to stand in, right? You're going to go along with the herd and say, that's just easier, right? It's what I want to do. I'm not saying either that one's better than the other, right? I'm just saying, what are you going to do? And that has to be rooted in your personal beliefs. What are you devoted to? What is your intent on? What is your religious? What is your philosophy, right? And the more you can define that, I believe, okay, and again, this is just, I'm not even going to tell you it's knowing, but I can say that I meditate on it and I see it as knowing, that if we can stand in that, the universe will come to our aid. Because we're based it on universal laws. And if these laws aren't real, then take me now, Lord. I don't really want to be part of a world that is not based in law, love, and intelligence.
I've seen it in action with my friend, Joe. Yeah. He left all the financial job that he had because he just felt he had to do what he had to do. And, had his journey. And now he's at the point when he, it's like a wave, a period, but basically, he's connecting with new people, attracting new clients just by setting his intention. It's kind of interesting, and we talk about how do we approach people. When you pose certain questions, you can kind of test and you can see what reaction you get. Then if this person will be something that you'll be able to have I don't know, some kind of relationship, just in general. It's very easy. You can do it with your family. And then you'll know, this is where they're at and this is what they've become, and then there's other people, you'll just say one word and that's it. You're just on the street, you happen to meet this person, you just say this and wow, So yeah, I think we have to attune to that,
But I will say also that since I've been studying this and meditating on it, the law of attraction has really kicked in. And I am actually bringing people towards me, I believe, right, that do have these same qualities and resonance and so on. So for me, a little bit of it is within my cosmology, within my religious, within my personal myth, how much do I actually believe that the universe is working with me and for me? And how much do I believe is working against me? And I think that's one of those other questions we need to have within our cosmology, because we know it is cyclical, so we're not always going to be up. But when we're down, do we actually see it as a, part of the polarity, part of the unfolding, part of what we're going through, or is it just the end of the world? Because it's not within our will, it's not within what we want. And so with that, we're going to stop because it is now 6:11.
Oh, wow.
And I don't want to get at people because we've tried to stay within a certain time period. So hopefully
Thanks for-
everybody enjoyed this. It was a little bit different, a little bit off on some tangents. But this is where I think we need to go for the next couple of weeks to get a little bit rooted and grounded, and just for the sign of the times that's coming. And with that being said, I'm going to stop recording, and we can talk a bit if we want afterward, so that we can actually begin to. Where's my thing? Here it is more. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now. So
Thanks,
everybody, yeah,
thank you.
and anybody who's watching this on YouTube, like I was talking earlier to some of the people here, if you can, put in some comments. I haven't gotten any comments back. I've gotten some likes, so thank you for that. But say what resonates with you if you can, or say what you do or disagree with it. It really is helpful. And
Okay.
and so if you can, take some time and do that. So you don't have to subscribe, but at least put in some comments so we can see if what we're saying is resonating with everybody else, because we're all here to help in any way we can. All right. So thank you so much.